Greetings and salutations, gamers. My name is Kyle, also known as GamersWeekend, and welcome back to the Dark Souls Challenge. Last time, we took on the highly requested Dark Souls 2 with only hexes, a run that we blasted through about as easily as you'd expect, although it was a fun time. But today, we're back into Dark Souls 1 for something that's, in my opinion, far more interesting. When it comes to making challenge ideas, there are many ways it can come about. Sometimes I'll choose a certain theme, like magic-only runs, or sometimes I'll look at a certain mechanic of the game and ask how the game would be played without it. Stamina-less and no walking come to mind. And sometimes your brain just chooses to look at the title of the game and delete half of it. Dark Souls, but no souls. Sounds like all you're left with is darkness. And yeah, that's about the direction my sanity's currently going. But something I began to look into on a whim turned out to be a far more interesting challenge. But before we get into any of that, let's go over the rules. For this run, we are completely restricted from using soul currency. Keep in mind that this only applies to the currency form. Things like Firekeeper souls are still fair game. This is going to be an all bosses run, so all the base game and DLC needs to be completed for the challenge to be complete. And finally, no major glitches will be allowed. And one last thing before we get started, if you enjoy this video and don't mind doing the YouTube thing, it would mean a lot to me. And that should be about it. I hope you're all having a wonderful day, and without further ado, this is the Dark Souls Remastered No Souls Challenge. We start by naming our character Joja, after the Soulless Corporation of Stardew Valley, and start by picking the Deprived class. There's a bunch of really cool options for routing this run, but Deprived has a few different levels we'll appreciate throughout the run. The Asylum is no different from a regular run, clubbing our way to the Asylum Demon, and then jumping attack for the double hit. Nothing major to see here. However, once we leave the Asylum, we run into the first major block of the challenge. The game immediately informs us that we can level up at bonfires. I don't think I need to tell you that levels cost souls. This is a lie. We are never looking at this level up menu again. These are our stats for the entire run. Into Undead Burg, and things are still fairly normal. We stop by the Undead Merchant to find that he has plenty of stuff for sale in exchange for souls. Okay, so no levels or merchants this run. That's not so bad. We can get around not having merchants. Without being able to buy items, we'll need to scavenge all the items we can in case they could prove useful later. In Undead Burg, we can collect some throwing knives, the light crossbow, and 3 gold pine resin. While we're here, we can also parry the Black Knight to death so the game can prank us with an unusable weapon, and then we head for the Taurus Demon. This early on in the game, we're still about as strong as we'd normally be, so the bowl doesn't look any different. However, I do decide to save a gold pine resin here in case I might need it later. After running past the dragon and through the parish, we unlock Lord Trek's cell and grab the first Firekeeper soul. We can take both of these down to Firelink so we can yeet Mr. Hugs off a cliff and get some extra healing for our sippy cup. Afterwards, I decide to head back to the Hellkite Dragon in Undead Burg. We can apply gold pine resin to our club just before the dragon jumps down. Once it's on the bridge, we can hack away at its tail to collect the Drake Sword. Normally, I wouldn't touch this weapon with a 30-foot pole, but given its high base damage, this thing's going to serve us nicely until we can collect the weapons we're going to be using for the rest of the run. Thankfully, the Deprived has good enough stats to two-hand it, so with the sword in hand, we head to the Gargoyles. Once again, things haven't deviated too far from a normal playthrough quite yet, but all of that's about to change very soon. In the meantime, that's Bell of Awakening number 1. Now we head back down to Andre so we can... Weapon upgrades cost souls. I mean, I knew about that coming into this run, but it's starting to settle in exactly what I signed up for here. I mean, if you can't join them, beat them, or something like that. With the Crest of Artorias in hand, we can make our way past the Forest Hunters to grab the stone armor. We may not be able to upgrade our health, but the tank stats this armor provides will still be useful in a number of places. To go alongside it, we'll pick up the Wolf Ring, and while we're at it, the game will prank us with a stone greatsword. Another fairly rare drop that's totally useless to us. On our way down to the basin, we scavenge a longbow and 16 feathered arrows, and then make our way down to the grass crest shield for the passive stamina boost. With some basic gear in hand, we make our way to the lower undead burg, where one of the hollow thieves will drop us some fashion, and then make our way into the capra demon. With the wolf ring and stone armor, we're an unkillable behemoth against the goat demon and his dogs. We don't even bother going in far enough to aggro the second dog before the capra demon goes down. Next stop is the depths, which we're usually after for the large ember, but this time we're after freeing Laurentius. He'll play his part soon, but first let's finish the depths with the gaping dragon. The Drake Sword isn't obsolete quite yet, but this blade isn't going to last much longer after this boss. That being said, the sewage salamander is easy enough as it is, and we bring him down without taking a single hit. At this point, I decided to screw around in Upper Blighttown, which didn't lead to anything massive, and headed back to our Pyro Boy in Firelink. As thanks for freeing him, he gives us a Pyromancy Flame completely free of charge. We may not have the ability to upgrade it or buy new spells, but anything we find on the ground is completely fair game. Most of you probably know where this is going. Down to Blighttown and up past the parasitic wall, we can get our hands on the Pyromancy Power Within. I've used this spell a lot in past challenges, but in case you're not familiar with it, Power Within grants the player a huge buff to stamina regeneration, as well as a 40% increase to almost every source of damage. In exchange, it slowly ticks away the user's health. Normally that last bit isn't so bad, but without the ability to upgrade our vitality, this makes this downside a lot more dangerous than you might expect. Either way, with Power Within now in hand, I'm finally ready to begin chasing after one of the weapons I want for the run. We make our way down to the New Londo ruins and stack up 10 of our humanity to boost our item discovery. Most of the ghosts here, with the exception of the screaming ones, have a low chance to drop the jagged ghost blade. Item discovery is admittedly a complicated process, but assuming this formula and my math are correct, the drop rate for the jagged ghost blade at 10 humanity should be about a 1 in 50. Not super bad odds. In fact, before we even clear our first run, we managed to get our first drop. The jagged ghost blade may not seem like much, but it's perfect for this run. 155 base damage may not be quite as high as the Drake Sword's damage, but its extremely low stat requirement of 7 strength means we can use it both one- and two-handed. Not only does that make our shield an option, but its moveset is fast and comes equipped with a high bleed proc. All around, a great combination for getting us through a lot of these bosses. Let's give it a test run, shall we? After heading back to the asylum to grab the crest shield and the rusted iron ring, it's time for the stray demon. With Power Within, our base damage is already high enough to start seeing yellow, and with the stray's terrible resistance to status effects, we proc bleed every 3 attacks. In almost no time at all, we decimate the stray demon. After picking up some useless rock, and do not forget that doll, we head to the catacombs to take on Pinwheel. Even without bleed procs, this boss's health is already low enough. With the bleed, Pinwheel is Pinwheel. Thankfully, he drops us the Mask of the Child. This means if we need to, we can swap out the grass crest shield to other shields and not lose out on the passive stamina boost from here on out. A drop I'm super happy to get my hands on. Back down to Blighttown, and it's finally time we exit the early game. It's Quelaag time. Even with Power Within, our damage isn't spectacular, but we're still seeing yellow chunks in our health bar. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Any day I see yellow damage is a good day. That being said, Power Within takes us fairly low, and we're already getting to the point where boss attacks can take out most of our health. We're going to have to be careful from here on out. Before we head to Sens, we drop the lava nugget off at daycare and quickly stop by the catacombs to grab the Dark Moon Seance ring before we head into Darkroot. With the crest shield's high magic protection, the Moonlight Butterfly does very little damage, and while we can't quite one-cycle the butterfly, 2 is more than enough to put it down. While we're in Darkroot, we might as well take down the doggo. Sif is the first boss that I'm concerned about taking damage from. That sword may not hit hard against normal builds, but with our lack of levels and Power Within taking, I have a feeling this fight is dangerous. However, Despite our worries, we're able to maneuver through the dog's attacks and put him down on the first try. We're ready to head into Sen's fortress, and another potential weapon on my scavenging list is found here at the base of the boulder trap. Taking down the first mimic of the game lets us get our hands on the lightning spear. The lightning spear is essentially just the normal game spear that comes with a lightning infusion. This normally doesn't mean a whole lot in normal playthroughs, but for this challenge it's an absolute blessing. It's not quite our new main weapon, as the lightning damage won't be effective everywhere, but anywhere we can find an enemy who doesn't resist lightning, we'll be taking full advantage of this. Speaking of which, time for the Iron Golem. While he does hit hard, gravity is the biggest enemy when fighting the big man. Unfortunately for him, that's a two-way street, and we are glad to send him spiraling down it. Once we arrive in Anor Londo, we quickly make our way through the rafters and past the archers as per normal. Nothing too different here as long as we're careful not to get hit. But soon enough, we arrive at our first true test against the Anor Londo slammers. For this particular fight, we'll be using the jagged ghost blade and focusing down Ornstein first. While I'm confident in being able to take out both versions of Phase 2, alone time with Smo is going to be a lot easier to handle. Between our two weapon options, jagged ghost blade's speed is going to be a lot better suited for navigating Phase 1. Going into Phase 2, Smo was kind enough to leave us a phantom hitbox, which gave me a bit of a spook during our exchange. But in the end, we're able to take out the duo on our first try. Once we've obtained the soul bowl of soul soup, we might as well clean up the rest of the city, so we detour down to Gwendolyn. Our damage admittedly isn't great, and being one of the highest damage bosses in the game makes this a scary encounter. But it's one I've been through enough times to know how to navigate through his barrage, and we clear him out on the first try. While we're out and about, we also find this really neat painting that... Oh, hell no! Priscilla is up next, and the lightning spear has a great interaction here. The sparks from the lightning infusion travel across the target we hit, letting us see Priscilla's location far easier. Once her shout is broken, there's not much she can do. Crossbreed Priscilla gets crossed off our list. Once we arrive back in Firelink, we go ahead and place the Lord Vessel. Now that the barriers are open, it's time to get to work on the 4 lords. The first one we'll be going after is the 4 kings. I don't think our damage is going to get any better from here on out, so we might as well get them out of the way. Before heading down to the ruins, we'll make a quick trip into the graveyard to grab the binoculars. There's a really cool use we have for these. The ghost house would be particularly terrifying, but without the ability to buy arrows, killing Ingward is going to be a lot more awkward. We have firebombs, but normally the player's camera can't be angled high enough to throw them up that far. That's where the binoculars are going to come in. Using the binoculars, we center Ingward on our screen, then look straight up as far as the game will let us. Once we exit binocular view, the camera is at a much higher angle than the game normally allows, which is a perfect angle to throw the firebombs we scavenged all the way back in Undead Burg to take out Ingward. Once he's down, the key pops into our inventory and we can freely drain the runes. Now that we're riding high, time for the 4 kings to punch us back down and remind us exactly what game we're playing. The 4 kings, also known as the Dark Souls DPS check. This isn't my first rodeo fighting them on low damage, but normally I'm allowed to offset the low damage with much better defenses. In this run, that's not exactly an option. While I do have the crest shield, it can't protect me from everything. And while Power Within is nice, as we get later and later into the game, our damage is getting smaller and smaller. The fact that Power Within is a percentage bonus rather than a flat one means the benefits it provides is going to get smaller and smaller as the run goes on. What we're left with is a set of circumstances that back us into an already tough encounter. And maybe I'm just being superstitious, but I swear the kings had it out for me this run. I've never seen the kings spam their grab attack as much as I did in this playthrough. Eventually, I decided that while I may not be able to enter full tank and spank mode, I eventually donned the stone armor and carefully chose what hits I would be tanking and what hits I would be dodging. This was a fight about stamina and damage efficiency, and it admittedly took me a fair amount of tries. But eventually, we were able to grind down the king's health bar and claim our first Lord Soul. Since Pinwheel is already down, we might as well head for Nito next. As always, his skeleton crew is the biggest threat here, but we don't exactly have the health to stave off their attacks. Even in stone armor, their bleed is still threatening, and with our damage to Nito being quite low, this is an uphill battle. That being said, we may be able to remove the skeletons from the equation. Weapon infusions may be off the table due to requiring souls, but there's always the Artorias Straight Sword. This blade has a divine modifier, making it capable of permanently killing skeletons. It does have a faith requirement of 14 that we don't meet, but there's nothing in the game that says we have to meet its requirements to use the divine effect. While the damage on the weapon is going to be greatly diminished, we can use backstabs and parries in combination with the Hornet Ring found in Sif's room in order to make up for the lack of damage. It's a somewhat slow process, but we carefully clear out Nito's minions one by one. Once it's just us and the Rave Lord, we're in a far more favorable battle, and we slowly grind his old bones away for our second Lord Soul. For Lord Soul number 3, we'll be taking on the Izalith boss gauntlet, and first up to bat is the Demon Fire Sage. He may be a bit quicker than his Asylum counterparts, but at the end of the day, he's still just as allergic to bleed procs. Jagged Ghostblade makes quick work of him. Next boss to take on is the Centipede Demon, and this thing is a far greater match. The lava in his arena is painful, and without the ability to level up our health, we have to navigate this lava lake carefully if we want to stand a chance. Eventually, we manage to lead the demon deep enough to the right platform so we can fight him on solid ground, and once we've got him in a fair fight, there's not much he can do against the Jagged Ghostblade. Bed of Chaos is the last one between us and Lord Soul number 3, and funnily enough, this is the easiest one so far. We head to the right side from outside the bed's range and take out orb number 1. Then after a quit out, we reset the fight to head along the back left wall with the longbow. We may not have the stats to use it effectively, but we don't need to get any meaningful damage out of it. As long as we can hit the left orb, it counts, and we can easily shoot through the branches with the arrows we scavenged from Darkroot Basin. After that, it's our usual charge through the center, and after squashing the bug, we get our hands on Lord Soul number 3. The last Lord Soul we need to get our hands on is Seath's, so let's make our way there. There aren't any interesting complications as we make our way through the Duke's archives, and we make our way through the Crystal Substance Cave in order to take on the Scaleless. Lightning Spear is our go-to on this one, and with 10 active humanity, curse resistance isn't much of an issue. As long as we don't make any severe positioning mistakes, this fight shouldn't be too bad. Just a tad longer than the usual experience. That makes our Lord Soul collection a complete set. Before we can make use of them though, we have a much trickier experience ahead of us. Sanctuary Guardian is up first. This boss is fast, but normally its damage isn't an issue. That is, unless you have essentially no health upgrades and are running Power Within. Then its damage is very concerning. Jagged Ghostblade is going to be the play for us here. Not only will we appreciate the faster moveset, but if Sanctuary plays nice, we'll get in some nice bleed procs on top of it. After Power Within backfired on us on our first try, we come back attempt number 2 with much less error. Even through poison, we put the Guardian down. We make our way through the Royal Woods and soon enough run into the next boss on our list, Artorias. This is where things go from a neat run to a true challenge. For starters, Artorias easily has the ability to end our small health bar. Not every move he makes will one-shot us, but there are no 2 moves in a row that we can take. And that's assuming we didn't get hit by one of the attacks that does take all of our health in a single shot. As far as our damage is concerned, I first went for the Jagged Ghostblade for a bit more attack speed. Even with Power Within, we hit for a miserable 35 damage, and once it wears off, 25 damage is what we have to work with. Not only do we have to be near perfect in avoiding his attacks, but given our damage, we're gonna have to do that for a while. Eventually, we changed up our strategy and went to the Lightning Spear. While it might be a tad slower, at least in this case we're hitting over 50. And once again, any day I can see yellow is a good day. This was a fight that definitely put me back on my toes. But at the end of the day, there are far harder encounters I've had with the Knight of Wolves. It's almost a 12-minute fight, but eventually we bring him down. Admittedly, navigating Township this run was far more bloody than previous encounters. I actually died trying to make it through here than I did to almost any boss the entire run. Granted, I wasn't exactly approaching things carefully, more so just throwing myself at the brick wall, but eventually we make it down to the Abyss to take on Manus. This boss is all the problems we had with Sanctuary Guardian and Artorias twofold. Attacks that wouldn't be nearly as concerning in other runs are much trickier this time around, and if any part of that super combo of his tags us, it's all over. Not to mention the magic attacks he gains about halfway through the fight. We are thankfully able to scavenge a Necromancer Lantern from the Tomb of Giants to get our hands on the Silver Pendant, but even with the ability to block magic, that doesn't stop Manus from putting us in very tricky situations. And as far as the damage goes, even with Lightning Spear under the effects of Power Within, we're only seeing yellow on 2-handed strong attacks. Looks like we're in for yet another long fight that demands near perfection. But little did I know that one of this run's hidden killers was about to rear its ugly head and put a whole new spin on this run. We were about 9 minutes into an attempt on Manus, and just about 3/4 of the way through his health bar when all of a sudden, the Lightning Spear broke. Durability. All this time it had been waiting in secret. Every extra hit of our weapon, every extra attempt of a boss, every stray enemy we stopped to fight, all of it was slowly building up to the point where just as we were closing in on Manus, our durability ran out. This effectively crippled the Lightning Spear, and without the ability to use souls to upgrade, repair, or even revert its upgrades, this has effectively eliminated the weapon from our list. Thankfully, by some stroke of dumb luck, I decided to test earlier this kill if it was worth to use the Jagged Ghostblade. And rather than just swapping the weapons like I usually would, I kept it in my offhand. And thankfully, it was just enough. After a 14-minute and 20-second battle, we managed to grind down the Father of the Abyss. But little did I know that this fight was far closer than I was even aware of at the time. After taking Manus down, I decided to quickly check in on the Jagged Ghostblade's durability to find out that I was 1 point away from the Jagged Ghostblade suffering the same fate. We were this close to running out of durability on both of our weapons. That would have turned the fight into an absolute disaster. Thankfully, while we can't grab another Lightning Spear, we can absolutely farm for another Jagged Ghostblade. Granted, we weren't nearly as lucky this time around, taking almost half an hour of ghost farming, but we eventually refresh our inventory with a brand new Ghostblade. Now that we've got a weapon back in our hands, it's time to wrap this run up. 2 bosses to go and Calamite is up. The good news is Calamite is bleedable. The bad news is pretty much every problem we've had with Manus is continuing to shine here, except this time we get to do with Calamite's interesting hitboxes. Interestingly enough though, this was the run that forced me to learn a new way to treat this boss, specifically his sweeping head attacks. I've always felt like I've been hit or miss with them, but under the circumstances where even getting hit could spell the end of a run, I was forced to learn a new way to avoid them. What seemed to work for me is instead of dodging the head, pay attention to the neck. When I treated his neck like the blade of a sword, I began to dodge his attacks much more reliably, and to this day it's my new strategy for fighting the Calamity Dragon. It's almost exactly an 8-minute battle, but eventually we bring the Dragon of Calamity to an end. And with Calamite down, there's just one more boss to go. Jagged Ghost Blade in hand, Hornet Ring equipped, and power within ticking, it's time to face off against the Lord of Cinder. As always, the Estus Lock is a go-to strategy for Gwyn, but as most people know, it's not a perfect method. He does have a chance to break out of it, and with how little damage our Ghost Blade does, even with all the buffs, that means he has a far greater chance of escaping. This fight was a stress test to really test if we knew how to keep our cool under pressure, and to see how well we knew how to deal with Gwyn should he ever escape the Estus Lock. And at the end of the day, it was a test we passed with flying colors. And with that, we have officially killed every boss in Dark Souls Remastered without spending a single soul. This is such a neat run. There's a lot of parts of this run that I imagine may not have felt very different when I described it, but playing through this one was such a unique experience. This wasn't just a no level up and no upgrades challenge. This was something that felt far more complicated in such a fun way. Everything about this run felt like it was a test. Like for every part of the game, I had some random piece of game knowledge that I could use to get through things. It felt like my weird knowledge of this game gave me an advantage, and that's such a gratifying feeling. And that's without even addressing all the extra strategies I had banked up that I never even used. The variety of starting levels each class has makes all kinds of different weapons available to a run like this. Sorcerer begins with an entire 15 intelligence, which grants them access to Great Magic Weapon and Dark Orb. The Demon Catalyst is another potential weapon for some of the classes, which grants new access to fire damage. Not even to mention all the enemies that you would never normally look at and the farming potential they could have in the run. Even though I'm done with this run, I feel like it's still full of surprises to discover. If you're looking to test your game knowledge and skills in Dark Souls 1, I can highly recommend trying to play this game without spending souls. But that's gonna do it for me today. If you enjoyed this video, then please give it a thumbs up, pop that subscribe button, and ring-ting-ling that little bell to be notified whenever I drop another video. You can also join the Discord, links in the description below, to come chat and hang out with me and the rest of the community. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you gamers on the flip side. Later!